Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Great Lakes Seminar Series. My name is Melissa Matwig, and I'm, as you all know, probably, for the people online, my name is Melissa Matwig, and I am part of Sigler. And I am introducing our speaker today. Our speaker is Dr. Ted Lawrence, who is the Executive Director of the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. And he's been living, working, and researching in Africa for over 20 years. He completed his PhD at the University of Michigan at SEAS back in the day when it was SNRE. And focused on researching the governance and management of large multi-jurisdictional freshwater resources, specifically on Lake Victoria in East Africa, and conducted a comparative analysis of management approaches between African and North American lake systems. And so based on that background research, he's kind of translated that to and formed ACARE, which is a highly collaborative organization whose goals are to positively affect policy and management on Africa's Great Lakes by executing a long-term network of freshwater experts and to strengthen science in Africa. I met Ted a couple years ago at IAGLR, and since then have been helping out with ACARE as much as I can. And Ted is incredible to work with, charismatic, really funny. He's got a lot of jokes probably in his presentation. And overall, just, I don't think I've ever met anyone who is as much of a connector and just like, he takes this person and this person, puts them together, and it's really amazing watching him work and create this network between African scientists and hopefully across more with North American scientists as well. So without further ado, Dr. Ted Lawrence.
Aw, thanks, Melissa. It's also been a great pleasure working with Melissa for the past 2 years. I'm going to introduce Melissa. She was in Peace Corps Tanzania and connected with ACARE and started working with us and really advancing some of our programs and helping us out. That introduction that she gave was also most of the first part of my presentation. And then the second part was the rest of my presentation. So we're pretty much done here. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here and talk about ACARE, the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. I am Ted Lawrence, which Melissa just made plain. I'm the Executive Director of the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. I'm also a Senior Policy Advisor at the International Institute for Sustainable Development out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where IAGLR, the International Association of Great Lakes Research Conference, is going to be held this year. I also own only one tie and shirt, as you can tell. My presentation today is going to be a roller coaster of emotion as I introduce myself, which I've done already, and so is Melissa. Introduction of ACARE, which is the Aquatic Center, the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education. Introduction of the African Great Lakes, their importance, issues affecting them, issues affecting protecting them, and potential solutions. So there's going to be warmth and happiness and intrigue, and then a real dip in those issues affecting African Great Lakes, so we'll all be sad, and then we'll lift ourselves out with some happiness. There's also going to be, I think, some sympathy, because as we talk about the issues affecting the African Great Lakes, most people in this room and many of you watching are probably going to recognize those as being impacting the North American Great Lakes. I wanted to give you a little bit more background, just so you know why I'm here, how I, this Michigander, is working on the African Great Lakes. And it really all began when I was growing up in Colorado. I might have gone back too far. Anyway, I grew up in Colorado where there's no water, and apparently I caught a fish at some point. Oops, that's not supposed to be there. Apparently I wanted to be a cowboy. I've spent most of my life outside, which led me to get a degree, an undergraduate degree in environmental studies and geology on the western United States in Walla Walla, Washington, which most people have only seen in cartoons. That's me graduating. That was just a couple years ago. This is where it gets more relevant. Besides the outdoor part, I then joined the Peace Corps, similar to Melissa. And I was in Senegal, West Africa, so the opposite side of the continent from the African Great Lakes. But this is where I fell in love with Africa. The people, the ecology, the environment, the food, and that really informed the direction that I was going to go in. Upon returning from Africa, from the Peace Corps, I was invited to do a master's degree at the University of Michigan at the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And at the same time, this is where my direction was pulled towards freshwater, as I got a position at the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, first as an intern, and then for over 15 years working as a communications and policy specialist. While I was working on the North American Great Lakes and the systems here, I also began doing my PhD, and that was working on natural resource policy, governance, and behavior on Lake Victoria. So you kind of see all of this directing me towards to what we're talking about today, to ACARE. And while I was working, I worked so much with sea lamprey. So those of you in the North American Great Lakes, that's one of the invasive species we deal with. To our African colleagues, it's a good thing we don't have those. So this is me doing my PhD on Lake Victoria, just a couple fun pictures. Also, I've obviously aged. So my background led to the creation of the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education, but it wasn't just me, it was many of our colleagues that I've worked with, both on the North American Great Lakes, many of our European colleagues, and of course the vast network of people I've worked with on the African Great Lakes. The realization that there are issues and problems on the African Great Lakes and some of the processes that we use on the North American Great Lakes to kind of address some of those issues that we're dealing with. We thought, can we take some of those nuggets from North America, so some from Europe, and then some from Africa, and create a system by which we collaborate, which we coordinate, and which we solve some of those issues. And so we did. We named our organization Too Long, and so we made an acronym of ACARE. I say too long, and we're here at Sigler, which I'm not going to try and say, but ACARE. And of course, you can remember our acronym because we care, you care, and that's what, yeah, everyone says ACARE at the same time. We'll try that again later. So the ACARE was created overall to strengthen science on the African Great Lakes. And we want to do this because the African Great Lakes are all bi or multinational, just like the North American Great Lakes, hence the systems that I'm going to speak about, a highly collaborative network. When you have many experts working on a resource, tends to have better results. So ACARE, which I run, a co-founder of, we want to make sure that we don't make some of the historical mistakes, which I'm going to also talk about a little bit today. And so we want to be guided by experts globally. We have, I think, around 70% of our board of directors are African freshwater experts. And we also peppered in there many others globally who have either freshwater or African experience. And so some of you in this room might recognize a couple people in here. Here's the rest of our board, including from the International Institute for Sustainable Development and the University of Michigan. Our staff is mostly based in Africa, although we have a supporting cast here in North America also, including Miss Melissa Matwig up there. Some of you might recognize her from around 4 or 5 minutes ago. Oops. Okay, so this gets into the more exciting part of the talk, is the African Great Lakes. And I've been very lucky this morning to be interviewing and talking with people this morning at the NOAA lab here. And I think I should have put a lot more emphasis on describing the African Great Lakes. So I'm sorry, this is going to be fairly brief, but I'll give you a bit of a touch of the African Great Lakes and the excitement that we're working on and some of the problems. But first, let's talk about where they are. And this is, of course, in Africa. It's Eastern and Southern Africa. It's the Rift Valley, but also you'll notice Lake Victoria, the huge one there, is a caldera, extinct. I think it's extinct caldera, luckily. There are 7 African Great Lakes with 10 countries. This contain over 25% of the world's fresh water with very, very rich biodiversity and ecosystem functions, which millions of people rely on. You'll notice, I'll go through them here, sorry. Lake Albert, Lake Edward, we're just going down the rift here on the left, Lake Kivu, Malawi Nyasa Nyasa, we'll get into why that has 3 names, Lake Tanganyika, the longest lake in the world, Lake Turkana, and Lake Victoria. Again, my specialty and my expertise is on Lake Victoria, along with many of the colleagues that I worked with in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. The countries that we work, so just to quickly, I've already mentioned this, but over 65 million people, we're still working on that number of people through all the basins, et cetera, but millions of people rely on these lakes for their livelihood, for their food security. And the African Great Lakes, a bit different than the North American Great Lakes, more sustainability for their direct livelihood support. Here are the 10 countries that they work in. Again, just highlighting that these are all multinational or multi-jurisdictional lakes. And that's where our specialty comes in. The people who are working on through ACARE have either backgrounds on the African Great Lakes or the North American Great Lakes, which we all know are multi-jurisdictional. So it takes that specialty to engage with numerous people and ensure that we harmonize our efforts. Lakes Edward and Albert, here's the more of the exciting part, right? Lake Edward is the smallest of the African Great Lakes, still home to over 80 fish species, which is almost as many as we have in the North American Great Lakes, right? How many fish species do we have? It's under 200, right? Ish. No fish people here. Okay, but anyway, we have, I mean, this smallest lake in Africa as close to what all of the North American Great Lakes have. Lake Albert is has the lowest fish diversity. Still 11 million people within the catchment relying on these resources. So massive amounts of pressure. And then these 2 lakes have oil and gas development emerging and are considered a very high priority threat. I think this is where we have some of that sympathy from the North American aspect, right? We have the Line 5, the pipelines, and we're also doing research at the Experimental Lakes area in Ontario about freshwater oil spills and how that impacts the ecosystems and how you clean it. And so I don't think we have any of that research or efforts on Lake Edward and Albert. This can be considered one system. We have the Kasinga River, Lake George and Lake Edward, and then Semliki connect Lake Albert. And then you'll see Lake Victoria, which we're not talking about yet, but that connects to the northern part of Lake Albert through the White Nile and Lake Choga. Lake Kivu, also one of the smallest in terms of surface area, but a deeper lake. Many people are relying on this lake for livelihoods. It's a largest source of protein for the citizens of Rwanda. And then this is, of course, what I wanted to talk more about, but I didn't know I should, but methane extraction, carbon dioxide sink at the bottom of the lake. It also becomes more saline in this deeper part. This is a very volcanic, active volcanic region. So the chemistry and the ecology is very exciting. They're using that methane, they're extracting that methane to use for power generation in the region. The Ruzizi River connects Lake Kivu with Lake Tanganyika, which I'll talk about Lake Tanganyika in a few minutes. Lake Malawi, Nyasa Nyasa. There's 3 countries. There's Malawi. I didn't mention the other countries on those other lakes, but DRC is one of the countries that border Edward, Albert, and Kivu, and then Uganda and Rwanda. And this is Malawi. Mozambique and Tanzania, each with a different name. Two of them are just spelled a little bit differently, but we always refer to it as Lake Malawi, Nyasa, Nyasa. This is the third deepest lake in the world, the most species-rich lake in the world, so dwarfing our North American Great Lakes. Not to compare, no, I'm specifically comparing. And if you look at this map here or this poster of the cichlids, pretty unique blue cichlids. And I just want to mention that we'll be having our annual meeting in Malawi in February of 2027, and we're going to snorkel on these, so please come over to Malawi with us. Thank you. Lake Tanganyika, the longest lake in the world, second oldest, second largest by volume, and second deepest. Does anyone know the first largest by volume and all that? Don't say the Caspian Sea. That's too saline. Anyone? Baikal. So Baikal is the winner on most of these. The lake supports around 350 species, so not as species rich. And then Turkana is the cradle of mankind, largest permanent desert lake. Very exciting, very few resources or infrastructure in this region. A lot of subsistence fisheries, much more difficult to get management research in this area. By the way, the Omo River comes in from the north, which isn't shown on this map. It's the umbilical cord of Lake Turkana. This is a more saline, still a freshwater lake, because the only outlet is evaporation. Lake Victoria, my specialty, world's second largest freshwater lake by surface area, second only to Lake Superior. Oh my gosh, thanks. I was really worried about the Great Lakes. So it hosts the most prolific inland fishery in the world, producing 100 million tons of fish per year. And that's compared, once again, to the North American Great Lakes, 25,000 tons. The reason why I was pointing out those rivers to those in those specific lakes is because this is not all one system. So while we have 7 African Great Lakes with 25% of the world's fresh water, the North American Great Lakes are all interconnected. Their importance, we kind of already went over this, right? The fisheries of the African Great Lakes support millions of people throughout the basins, throughout the regions. There are very different fisheries, everything from international exports, which you see in the middle picture here is the Nile perch, which is introduced by the colonial governments in Lake Victoria in the 1950s, late 1950s, exploded in the 1980s. The one on the right is daga, a sardine type fish, which is one of the most prolific. Again, these are tropical lakes, so the regeneration of these fish is amazing. These are more locally used fish and also used in food aid in conflict areas. You'll see some tilapia here, which is a lot of cage farming, which I will not be talking about today, but is an up and coming industry. And this is one would consider a middle class fish. A lot of this are pictures of Lake Victoria because of my specialty, but keep in mind that we have similar fisheries and similar kind of spectrum on most of the African Great Lakes, except for the international aspect. Not so much beyond Lake Victoria. Lake Albert has some Nile perch. And then I had one other comment about, and then there's the aquarium trade. So those blue cichlids that you saw or other cichlids are often shipped internationally for aquarium trade, pet stores, etc. Everything that comes with fisheries is part of this huge economy that supports people's livelihoods. So everything from engines, nets, you see fish farms, and then of course there's the fish industry. And I'm also not going to talk about kind of the black market trade, but dried fish is often unaccounted for and secretly shipped across borders all over the place, especially the DRC and other conflict areas. Lots of studies going on this because it's a huge economy that is not really measured. The valuation of that needs to be understood a little bit more. Tourism, remember when I said we're going to go to Malawi and snorkel? That's why I put that poster back in there. Those rocks are in Mwanza, Lake Tanzania. Lake Victoria in Tanzania. Power generation, keeping water, these are all critical resources for all of these things. Then there's transport. Just as a quick side note, I also give talks on health and water quality. Anybody know what that is on the back of that person transport? Yeah. That's the head, that's the latrine. You'll notice that it's not going anywhere except right behind that motor. This brings up water use. People directly go to the lake to get water out. You can also water your cattle there. I don't have a picture, a broader picture, but some of these pictures were taken near each other. So people are collecting water next to cattle that are feeding and defecating and peeing in the water. People are using soaps. People are washing cars. The cars in that are being washed in Lake Victoria in harmful algal bloom water, which is probably also causing harmful algal blooms. Probably not do car washing cause harmful algal blooms. So the challenges affecting the resources, once again, this is the sympathy, empathy part, and kind of the sad part. But the main driver of a lot of issues is climate change. It increases populations around freshwater resources as we have a general migration towards these kind of open access freshwater. And I put that in quotes because there's typically supposed to be regulations on how you can access a fishery, for example, in Lake Victoria, these other lakes, but you don't have management processes that really restrict that. So you put in higher pressures, you have higher uses around the lakeshore, urban industrial runoff, deforestation, et cetera. So these are all typical things that I think most of us understand affect or impact freshwater resources. And of course, the results of that are, you have fewer fish per person if you have larger populations, crop and land-based stressors, water quality reduction. We'll be talking about all these. This is just the Lake Victoria example, and this only goes up to 2015, and I've looked up at a couple other population maps. And when you look at those population maps, you see around the African Great Lakes and other water resources, these densities becoming really large, really compact in this area. Again, this is just Lake Victoria, and you can see how red it got into 2015, and I know that it's growing more from all of my visits and continue to work there. So these are causing these stressors. When you have climate change variations in different parts of Africa, you affect crop production and animal husbandry, and that's where you have this migration. When it was around 2007, the Nile perch boom, which is a big international export industry in Lake Victoria, really caused even more pressure on Lake Victoria because you can collect a lot of money just by getting one of these Nile perch, which used to be very big, 6 feet long, or I don't know how many meters that is, 30,000. Anyway, but really big fish, which were then sold into Europe, just massive amounts of money. So you have a lot of people coming in here. Crop production. You also have other industries like rose production right on the shore of Lake Victoria. So you're putting in pesticides and other aspects that are running off. And these are all shipped to Europe the same night to be sold in markets. Harmful algal blooms. Anybody here work on Lake Erie? Is this Lake Erie or Lake Victoria? They're the same. One doesn't freeze though. I'm going to leave that a hanger. We'll have you guess. Invasive species. We all deal with invasive species. One of the major ones in the region is water hyacinth, which decreases ability to go out into the waters and fish, as well as causes oxygen depletion when you have dying mats of this going into the bottom, other ecological destruction, including on the dams and water access. Once again, I'm just re-showing this to show you that the impacts of what we do for the benefit to humans of cleaning your cars and getting water and watering your cattle are also a detriment. And then you affect your water resources. And so that pond there that you see the biggest picture, that's their drinking water. They do not treat it. The people with the big cartons and the bikes, take Lake Victoria water, which has fecal coliform. All of the water resources in one of our studies showed fecal coliform in every single water resource around Lake Victoria, except for those that was treated out of a Coca-Cola plant that came out of a spigot, which was free to the people to use. But how are you going to get that if you don't live near the Coca-Cola plant? The challenges affecting protecting the resources. So here we go, is the sad part. How do we protect these large freshwater resources? From the North American perspective, we've been working on this for many, many years. We've had many efforts, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, NOAA, GLERL, all of these things have emerged over many, many years to try and protect these resources. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission created lake committees by which we gather experts and managers to help coordinate how we want our lakes to look, how to manage them on one lake. So there's a lake committee for Lake Michigan, for Lake Huron, Lake Ontario. So why don't we do something like that on the African Great Lakes? And I just took 2 steps ahead, because I'm going to talk about that after talking about the challenges affecting protecting the resources on the African Great Lakes. So just briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about historical approaches, the lack of sufficient research, which is part of that historical approaches, the lack of coordination, which we all know about, and binational, multinational resources, and then a few other things that results really in, if we don't pay attention to it, you have parochial or individual management or approaches to binational resources. Water is mobile, fish are mobile and invisible. So if you're taking out of one side of the lake, you're taking it from somebody else on another side of the lake. So you have to coordinate with water quality and fisheries. That wasn't mainly for this room, but the people on the, you have a lack of data, and most importantly, a lack of training opportunity, which I'll get to. So this is about the critically detrimental impacts of bungee science. I'm calling it bungee science because helicopter science means that you land a helicopter and you could stay there. Parachute, you're landing and you stay there. And parasitic just sounds crazy. But bungee, think about it. You go down, grab, and then you leave. And so I just renamed it, sorry. Okay, so what is bungee science? It's basically an approach by which researchers from the developed world, and a lot of this came from colonial residue, which I have a whole nother talk on that, which we'll do after lunch. And you create research needs, projects, establish funding for issues based on your own assumptions, motives, and personal needs. And this often, or can contrast with what's actually needed on the ground. It looks like I'm pointing fingers and saying this is terrible. My research was first partially bungee science until I realized that I needed to get more involved, but I'm still working on it too. So problems with bungee science. Research is not informed by the experts on the ground. I assume everyone can relate to that, right? You go into a place and say, this is what you need to do. Really bad approach. It reduces leadership and agency of the scientists that are on the ground and can create dependency, especially largely on funding. Because if the global north has more money and says, I'm coming in to study sand grain size on your beach and I have $1 million to do it, who's going to say no if they don't have the resources, or if the government doesn't have the resources to do the research that needs to be done? It does not acknowledge the importance of local expertise or infrastructure. We, in general, often go in and we'll need a boat or we'll need resources or labs, and we will use them, not often training or engaging the scientists on the ground, and then we head out. It does not include collaborations and partnerships, just bolstering that point. And it's often can be disconnected. So if I go in and I think I know what needs to be done on a lake, and I don't know what other research is happening, that it's been done before with other researchers, we could be repeating research or creating research that cannot be compared to other data. We need to communicate with the people who are there and who are already doing that work. This I already got to, right? Not often full lake studies. Most people want to study some aspect of Lake Victoria in Uganda, but what about Tanzania and Kenya? Any other lake, right? If you're in Lake Kivu and just studying on the Rwandan side. Research or other projects are almost always short-term. Now, I want to preface this by, we do lots of short-term workshops and processes, but we have to be careful. Having short-term 2 to 5 year research gathering expeditions can actually be harmful if you're collecting data so sporadically that you don't know what's going on in a time series aspect. So we have to make long-term approaches to data collection and time series. And then of course, this kind of encompasses what we've been talking about. You go in, you leave, and then you have all of your information behind paywalls. It's protected, collaboration ceases if collaboration is taking place. And then it can create an approach of personnel use without expertise. This is kind of just going back to using people without working with them. Sporadic and short-term data gives us skewed understanding, leaving us guessing. Sporadic and inconsistent data often doesn't allow for comparative analysis. Got to that, I'm just beating a dead horse. And inadequate funding for long-term, yes, we need long-term time series data. So in sum, the problem with bungee science, if we're not careful, is we're often creating more problems or less understanding. And we can also use that, which I will not get into now, but for political use. If you have a short-term punchy study that says we need to do one thing based on very small amount of data, maybe a politician will listen to it and do something wrong. One of the other aspects, this is under bungee science, but this is really just encompasses a general trend in the lack of understudy of the African Great Lakes. These are the most understudied African Great Lake, freshwater lakes in the world. You'll see, especially compared to some of the North American Great Lakes, except for poor Great Bear Lake, which isn't it's a pretty good lake. You'll notice that Lake Victoria has quite a bit of research, and that's attributed most likely to the Nile perch, which I talked about. It was introduced in the 1980s. It exploded in the amount of research that had to be done to figure out what was going on, the ecological damage, the economic boon and bane, deforestation, everything. Quite a bit happened there, so we have that. Here are the other African Great Lakes, and here are some other African lakes that are not binational but have not been studied quite a bit. So this is, again, somewhat just highlighting the fact that if you have short-term studies or sporadic studies or discontinuous studies, you have no ability to compare. You have no time series data. And to beat the horse a little bit more, imagine you're having very sporadic research, say on CPUE, that's a catch per unit effort in country A, and you have a different system in country B. You have two completely different outcomes from these inadequate monitoring approaches. Whereas if you have two different conclusions. So the whole point here is long-term, more consistent information is necessary to learn that in fact, this would be the trend. So the dearth of resources, this has come up, and I don't have tons to say on here besides that I think, and I'll do some more work on this, that the colonial aspects, that residue, and the bungee science leads to the governments not necessarily thinking that they need to put resources into the natural resources, into the freshwater lakes, because others are coming in and doing that. So what this causes is, say, the lack of research stations. This is from a paper that a lot of us wrote just this past couple years, where we don't have research stations. I think there's now one on Lake Albert. But where you don't have them, you're not having monitoring. Where you have some monitoring, and then mainly just fisheries research. That came from the need of harmonizing long-term multi-lake resources. So in close to some, I just wanted to let you know that we've not yet got to the part of the happy arc where we're all just like, how do we solve these problems, Ted? You're so depressing. I know. Let's get excited here. So we know that the African Great Lakes are really important. They're feeding and supporting millions of people in the African region, food security, livelihoods. We know that most of the problems that negatively affect these resources, most of the ones that happen in North America, except unfrozen. And then historical residue has negatively affected sound approaches in Africa. To solve that aspect is going to be a huge challenge, and I'm going to tell you about how we're going to do that. And then governments provide inadequate funding for natural resources. But here's the exciting part. We know what needs to be done to solve the problems on the African Great Lakes, and in part, it's because of the connections and the community of freshwater scientists globally, including in the North American Great Lakes and people here in this room, and these lovely ladies. So ACARE was started in 2017 with all the realization that we just talked about. What do we need to do to help protect the African Great Lakes? And this is, again, coming from our African colleagues on the ground, as well as experts from North America and Europe. And if we can envision a world where millions of Africans can depend on these healthy African Great Lakes to realize their own visions of livelihood and peace. And how can we do that? Let's start a highly collaborative system to strengthen science and positively affect these lakes. ACARE, a small square on the screen. What ACARE did, we collectively determined that there are 5 major areas that we need to work on to start protecting these African Great Lakes. The first one is an expert network, which we have created and adopted from North American Great Lakes Fishery Commission lake committees, and we turned them into advisory groups, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. We secure relationships with members, experts in 10 African countries, over 200 freshwater scientists, ranging from academics, people on the ground, researchers and government officials. African women in science, while I have not mentioned the dearth of women in science, I'll chat a little bit more about that, but having only 50% of the perspective is not going to get you far when creating solutions for any problem, specifically fisheries, where more than 50% of the women are part of the food, the fisheries infrastructure. And then monitoring, information exchange, and education and training kind of get back to what I was talking about those issues of bungee science, where you have the lack of monitoring. We need to exchange information, and we need to make it as freely as possible, not behind paywalls. And then who's going to be protecting these lakes after we're gone? The next generation of African freshwater researchers. So we did so. We created a highly collaborative process by which key stakeholders come together. We started a program by which we build capacity of early career and student female scientists. We're developing, it's still in the process, a long-term monitoring program. The nice thing about being here today is that I know that Noah and our colleagues here have a lot of background in monitoring, and we work with a lot of people in the North American Great Lakes on this, and we're going to be calling on you soon, probably at lunch. Information exchange. I think this doesn't need to be said, but we say it all the time. We need websites. We need to ensure that data and public websites to exchange powerful information, right? Data sets, papers, projects, and we need to make sure that these are freely and widely acceptable, so we know what's been done, what we can build on, and how to do comparative analysis. And then education and training is just that. Let's create a comprehensive network, which we're still working on, and I'll tell you about in a moment, how to train the next generation of freshwater researchers. So let's get into this for just a few minutes. Again, this is the happy arc, so everyone should be feeling very good. You should have your popcorn out, watching. It's like a movie. In 2019, we started the advisory group program. We had around 70 people come to Uganda, and these are all people from each of the 7 African Great Lakes. And we were really just wondering if we should start a program like this. We didn't have a board at this time. Well, we had a small board at this time, but we did not want to come in and say, hey, we're the global north. You know what you should do? And we're very, very aware of that every step we go. But we said, do you want to start something called an advisory group or a lake committee? This will help us exchange information and start harmonizing the efforts on each of the African Great Lakes. We figured that we would be designing these over the couple days, and instead all of them said, let's do it right now. So we spent 2 days in each of their groups designing them and naming them. You'll notice that there's only 6 groups here. I can count 2. The Lake Edward Albert Advisory Group is the key there. Those experts work together so closely on both of those systems. Remember, they're connected and also geographically close, and they're both in Uganda and DRC, that they became one group. Today, we have over 200 scientists. This is in Lusaka. I could not find the one from a month ago in Rwanda, but anyway, it's a similar picture. We now have access and connections to scientists, researchers, academic institutions, departments of fisheries and ministries of fisheries and environment, regional entities in all 10 of the African Great Lakes countries. I'll wait for the applause to die down. I'm just kidding. We have made it so our scientists are now leading the scientific endeavors. We have a long way to go, by the way. So the North American Great Lakes, I think, took, if I'm not mistaken, around 20 years for lake committees to like get a hold. And so we're still we're still working at the very, very early edges here. We are collaborating and harmonizing information. One of the most exciting stories was on Lake Kivu, when our Rwandan and DRC members were discussing monitoring how each of them was doing more and the other one wasn't. And through that conversation, they realized that they were creating and monitoring the same information. And now we're collaborating with that. That's happened on a couple other groups in different areas. We can now propose policy management. We're not quite at that stage yet. We have quite a ways to go to get more legitimacy, but it's growing every day, and engaging in funding and partnerships. So one of our groups, the Lake Malawi Nyasa Nyasa Fisheries and Aquaculture Basin, it's a really long name, has created it's registered its own entity in Southern Africa. So that was just a brief overview of the advisory groups and how we're moving forward with harmonizing and hopefully giving more legitimacy and agency to drive the research and funding on the African Great Lakes. African women in science, I didn't talk much about in this presentation. It's an underlying issue that has been affecting globally the sciences. We lack gender equality in sciences. We need more STEM professionals in general. There are fewer than 30% of the world's researchers are women. It's only 31% in sub-Saharan Africa. And I can tell you for certain right now that it's much less in the freshwater sciences, but it's growing, as you'll see. This is bringing unique perspectives and ideas to research, science, and conversation, but there's really understanding when we're talking about fisheries and freshwater, the women are on the ground typically, especially for water gathering, fisheries transport, on the beaches, markets. Without women's perspective, we would have less strong policies, management, and approaches. Gender diverse institutions are more likely to outperform other institutions. Oh, interesting. Sorry. Oh, and again. Okay. So ACARE created the African Women in Science program. It started around 2020. COVID really helped us out on that one. So it really got its strength in 2022. We now have training and instruction in leadership and scientific skills, career development, networking, field work, lab training, you can read them all, publishing, public speaking, and mentorship. And mentorship is a real key thing to keep in the back of your mind for the end of my presentation. The result has been enhanced leadership in the African Great Lakes region. Our advisory groups, when they first started, I won't go back to that picture, but there were very few women there. And most of the conferences we were going to, there would be around 200 or 300 people there with just a few women, and most of those were at the registration table. So we're building the capacity of early career women, working on the African Great Lakes and the associated water resources, integrate learning experience from a cohort of peers, experts, and mentors. It's an 11-month program, and that 11 months includes around 10 months of mostly virtual, and 1 month we bring those women over to North America. Many of you who have been to IAGLR have seen many of those African women there, and we are now engaging them in the global scientific community. Women who have never traveled outside of their country now come to Canada and the United States and start engaging into like-minded women like yourselves in the research. We've had 5 cohorts. We've had to date 72 participants from each of the 10 African Great Lakes countries. We do have challenges depending on the country. And then, oh look, in 2026, this is our newest cohort from just 1 month ago. I chose this picture because it just has the African new cohort, African Women in Science. But if I'd chosen the other one, you'd have seen Melissa Matwig in it, helping support our African Women in Science. Monitoring, we've talked quite a bit about monitoring. This is really a shorter part because creating a monitoring system for 7 African Great Lakes. As one can imagine, we're trying to do that, or we're doing some success right on the North American Great Lakes, but it's going to take a lot. We've had a couple test projects that have done fairly well, but the amount of resources that you have to get to do this is quite extensive. Plus, you have to figure out what parameters, what equipment, who's going to do it. It's too much for us at the moment, but as we grow, we'll have a monitoring expert trying to facilitate this. This is where I ask for your help specifically in helping create these in the future. We'll see you in Malawi to do that and during a workshop. Information exchange is fairly straightforward. We need to exchange information to know what we're doing. We have created the African Great Lakes Hub. This is meant to be, and is still growing now, a hub where we put as much information relevant to the African Great Lakes as possible. We want to make it as freely as possible and legally as possible. So we know that we can't put all the papers on there because they're behind paywalls. But what we can do is A, make it known that it exists. So just having it known that it exists makes it relevant. 2, put who the author is and their connections on there. So while you might not be able to afford it, you can contact that person and hopefully discuss, maybe get their paper from them. 3, this creates a network of new people connecting with each other. And 4, or D, creates new opportunities for publishing and research. So we're thinking that as we get this off the ground more than it is now, this is going to be a powerful tool. Now, this is just one of our information exchange tools. Almost everything we do is information exchange worthy, including the advisor groups, who I've already told you about, are exchanging information every month virtually, and then they meet in person once a year. All of the other aspects that we do with emails and email blast, monthly meetings, and then our own website are meant to engage our community as well as you. And then education and training. This is one that is actually advancing fairly quickly. We also need your help. Really, we're trying to link academic and training institutes globally to provide more opportunities for students. The academic and education aspects of our freshwater researchers in Africa is great. We have the top freshwater researchers we're working with in Africa. However, we found a dearth, sorry, I went too fast. We found a dearth of in-field training. And that goes back to, there's not a lot of money going to research institutes, at least those that exist. And so you don't have training opportunities for people to go into the water, to pull nets, to do a psyche, to go into labs. You have to wait for a research team from the global north. And if they don't include you, you still have no training. How can we fix that? Well, we're trying to create an in-field training program. Some of you may have heard of the School for Field Studies. If you haven't, look them up. It's basically a North American-oriented student field training experience where people go around the world and for a semester or for a summer, and they learn about field training. There are no tropical ecology field training, freshwater tropical ecology field training programs. And they also don't, they have a couple programs that include Africans in them, but mainly it's just focused on North Americans. So what if we connected and created the Tropical Lakes Program, School for Field Studies in ACARE? Let's pretend it's on Lake Victoria in Kenya, and you bring in equal amounts African freshwater researchers with your Global North students. You're creating a network, you're creating training, you're creating opportunities, and I'm assuming lifelong friendships. This is where it gets real floaty, right? And rainbows and unicorns. So we're working on this right now, especially on the unicorn stuff, but we're working on this right now. It's going to take a little while, but we think that we can pull off a summer program in the summer of 2027. Now, this is where you also come in. I've already been talking with some of you today about we can do some of these short-term workshops, programs, short courses, which still assist us in then furthering advancing our long-term strategy of education. We've already worked with people like the Bowling Green State University, as well as our partners on the ground in doing a harmful algal bloom research. And we always include African researchers and our North Americans, and sometimes Europeans, depending on where we are. Here's the second one, I think, was in Anyway, similar one. We've also had King's College London, as well as Rochester Institute of Technology, remote sensing workshops. We've had 3 of those already. And so those have really helped out a lot of our people on the ground getting a perspective of what's possible. We now have to take next steps though, right? So you can teach about remote sensing, but then where do the resources come from enacting that, getting that going, getting those programs going? That's what ACARE is doing, but we are not alone. It takes more than a village to protect our freshwater resources globally, and this is where you come in. We need researchers to help design research on the African Great Lakes, do it with ACARE. We'll engage the partners on the ground, develop a monitoring program. I put that in specifically, hoping everybody like, oh yeah, we've got you. And mentor. It doesn't have to be the African Women in Science program, but we have a mentor program with that for them. And then we also have young, both male and female researchers that need mentorship. In the academics arena, workshops, trainings, short courses, this is for researchers and academics, help publish. You can help people publish in Africa, work with them, work with ACARE, design larger education and training programs. Basically, freshwater experts become mentors, get involved with the African Women in Science. This is just a nice quote from Kofi Annan about how that distribution, that unbalanced distribution of scientific activity seriously creates serious problems, not only for the community, but for the developing countries, right? For the development itself. So we at ACARE, and hopefully with our growing community, can start lessening that gap of unbalance, creating agency, good science, and start protecting and making our African Great Lakes, and thus the world, a better place. Thanks. For my second presentation, I'm sorry. I went a bit long there. Thank you for bearing with me. I believe in this awkward silence, there are time for questions. Thank you.
Who is first?
Yeah, just did a whole AWIS talk. Come on.
Yeah, I just, it's nice to see all those people work together. I just wonder if there's any challenges you have faced for like border controls, culture difference, language barriers, something like that.
Most of the African countries we work with are English speaking, with the exception of a couple which are more French oriented. We've had a couple challenges with within our meetings, within our workshops of translation. However, we have many bilingual people, either within the groups that we're working with or with some of our own staff. So we've been able to overcome most of those. We're still paying close attention to that for our larger annual meetings. We have to make sure that that translation takes place, especially with French only or English only speaking. And those are in a couple of those advisory groups that I spoke of. Border crossings, man, a good time to bring that up. And I'll be careful here. As I've mentioned, we bring Africans over to North America for one of the conferences and to engage with members of the scientific community here. This does not have much to do with current US politics because we have challenges both in Canada and the US with visas and bringing people over for these conferences. And we are unsure how to overcome this at the moment. We keep getting rejections for fairly small issues. It's bureaucracy and it's a black box that we don't understand. Currently for the upcoming IAGLA conference, out of 12 African women, we've had 9 rejections immediately and only 3 have been accepted.
Who are the major funder of your project? The funding is sustainable?
Is our funding sustainable? I have not found many models that are sustainable at all. Ours is not. We have been very, very lucky through our connections and through our relationships to have funding come from the United States Department of State. They have interest have interest in freshwater resources associated with the North American Great Lakes and the African Great Lakes and like our programs. So we apply to end of year funding often and have been able to sustain most of our programs. There's been ups and downs and they continue to do so. We've diversified with many of our other foundations in trying to look for funding. Working in Africa as a US-based nonprofit has not been working as well as that we thought. The International Institute for Sustainable Development, our close partners, have been an amazing partner and have found Canadian funding to help us support our programs for over 4 years now. So I would just like to publicly thank the Canadian and the US governments and ISD for all of those efforts. For the foundations that have funded us, while smaller parts have been really impactful for the African Women in Science program, and we're now engaging in registering in Africa as an African entity to get more funding from international entities who work directly in Africa. And then for we're looking at registering in Europe. Many of the European aid agencies work in Africa on various things, and so we're going to try and look at that as diversifying.
You shared some really positive experiences on developing your network of SMEs or experts. On the municipality side, I wondered if you could share a little bit, with your experience there in terms of successes that you've had. I'm curious on the monitoring, because that's really important, how well that's going in terms of getting the different countries to collaborate and share costs. And I'll stop there.
So your question is about the municipalities, or what specifically? Sorry.
So it's related to the policies that are inherent in the municipalities, but then also from a monitoring perspective, as you're dealing with the different countries in the region, how are they contributing and supporting the efforts of ACARE?
Right, great question. So that actually comes kind of back to your question about the funding, because working with the various countries on these, we have taken a strategic approach to stay a little bit below national policies and engagement. And the reason is, there's a few reasons. One is, if you become successful enough to change, make change or have programs, some of those can be adopted or changed by higher levels of government. So at this point, while we do need to engage with higher levels of government, we need to stay at the lower levels of government, researchers, research institutes, and focus on creating good information so that we can then engage them in the future to make positive policy and management suggestions. We're being very careful. So ACARE is not going to do that as an organization. I'm not going to go tell an African government what they should do with their fisheries or water. We're going to leave that up to the advisory groups who are made up of the African experts to do that. So this comes back to also that, so I'm just going to dig back to the funding, which kind of relates to this. The African governments, while they probably see benefit to our programs on the ground, like the advisory groups, they're not going to fund ACARE, a US nonprofit, for any reason, because we're a US nonprofit. So we're going to have to get to a point where when we register in Africa and have more legitimacy in the eyes of these larger groups, that they want to fund us to keep these programs going, which I think would lead back into your monitoring question. We're not a funding agency either. So we don't have funding for monitoring, but we're trying to find mechanisms that our partners on the ground can enhance their monitoring. I hope that answered your question. It was kind of complex there, but yeah, we have a lot of moving parts. We have to be careful politically, as well as financially. Yeah.
All right, we're kind of out of time, but there's a couple questions online. I'm going to send those to you if you don't mind, so you can answer them later.
Sure, that sounds.
Okay.
Is one from my mom?
No.
Mom.
Unfortunately. But I think you'll enjoy the questions, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, nice one. I should have put that as the last slide. We care, you care, they care. Thank you.
Very nice. So good.
Great, thank you so much.
How about the applicants, their education level for surrounding countries? I heard that Uganda is working very well, and they have the entire Chinese system, education, K-12, and even